I want you to picture the exact moment your entire life gets reduced to 4 words, spoken to a stranger by someone who's supposed to call you family. That's where I'll start. Not with my childhood, not with my career. With the night my son-in-law leaned across a restaurant table, waved off a waiter like he was shooing a fly, and said, "Don't worry about her. She doesn't tip. She's cheap." He said it about me, in front of my daughter, in front of my grandchildren, in a restaurant I owned 40% of. He had no idea. And by the time this story is over, neither he nor anyone else at that table will ever forget the moment they found out. My name doesn't matter for this story, so let's just say I'm Robert. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years building a chain of restaurants from a single diner my father left me, one location in a strip mall nobody believed in, into a group of 11 restaurants across 3 states. I sold most of my stake when I retired 5 years ago. Most, not all. I kept 40% of the original 3 locations, quietly, through a holding company that has my lawyer's name on the paperwork instead of mine. I did that on purpose. You'll understand why soon. I built that business by counting every dollar like it mattered, because it did. I wore the same 3 shirts to work for a decade. I drove a truck with 240,000 miles on it long after I could afford better, because a paid-off truck is a paid-off truck. My late wife used to tease me, lovingly, that I'd negotiate the price of a stick of gum if you let me. I wasn't cheap. I was careful. There's a difference, and it's a difference that matters, because that difference is exactly what my son-in-law weaponized against me without knowing it would cost him everything. My daughter, Claire, married him 9 years ago. His name is Derek. Derek sells commercial real estate, or at least he tells people he does. In 9 years, I've seen him close exactly 2 deals that I know of. What Derek is very good at, what Derek has always been good at, is looking like success. Watches. A lease car 2 classes above what he can afford. A vocabulary full of words like portfolio and leverage that he uses like seasoning sprinkled on everything, meaning nothing. I never said a word against him. Not once in 9 years. Claire loved him, and my grandchildren loved him, and that was enough for me to keep my opinions in my own head, where opinions about your daughter's husband generally belong. But Derek had an opinion about me too. He just never had the nerve to say it to my face. Not until that night. It was my granddaughter Maddie's 10th birthday. Claire picked the restaurant. One of my 3, though she doesn't think about it that way anymore. It's just the place with the good chicken to her now. I was invited, obviously. Grandfather, birthday girl, why wouldn't I be there? I got there early, like I always do, and I sat at the bar for 20 minutes before the party arrived because old habits die hard and I like watching a dining room fill up. It tells you things. It told me that night that Thursday covers were down 12% from the month before, and I made a mental note to ask my old floor manager why, out of pure reflex. Claire arrived with the kids. Derek arrived 12 minutes later, straight from a closing, dressed like a man who wanted you to ask him about the closing. Nobody asked. I think that bothered him more than he let on. Dinner started fine. Kids were loud and happy, which is the only acceptable kind of loud at 10 years old. Claire and I talked about her sister, about Maddie's school play, about nothing, the good kind of nothing that families are supposed to talk about. Derek talked about a property in the Arts District that was, and I quote, about to pop. I should back up for a second, because you need to understand this wasn't the first time Derek had taken a small shot at me. It was just the first time he'd done it in front of a stranger who could get hurt by it. Over the years, there'd been a steady drip of little comments, always dressed up as jokes, always delivered with that same easy smile that let him say almost anything and call it teasing if you pushed back. At Thanksgiving, 3 years back, he made a comment about how I still counted quarters like it was the 80s when I paid cash at a gas station instead of tapping a card. At Claire's 35th birthday, he told a table full of her friends that I'd probably negotiated my own retirement party down to store-brand cake, which got a laugh, because Derek is good at getting laughs, and laughs are a hard thing to argue with in the moment without looking like the humorless old man in the room. I let all of it go. Every time. Partly because Claire was happy, and a happy daughter was worth more to me than winning an argument about a joke. And partly, if I'm honest with myself, because some small part of me wanted to see how far he'd actually go if nothing ever pushed back. You learn more about a person's character from what they do when they think there's no cost to it than from almost anything else they'll ever show you. Derek, it turned out, would go pretty far. He just needed the right audience and a birthday cake to find out exactly how far. Here's where it happened. Our waiter that night was a young guy, maybe 22, clearly new, the kind of nervous, careful you only see in the first few weeks of serving job before the fear wears off into competence. He'd been solid all night, attentive without hovering. Got Maddie's order right on the second try when she couldn't decide between two things, which is its own small skill. Near the end of the meal, he came by to check on desserts, and I asked him, quietly, just to him, the way you do when you've spent 3 decades in this business and you can't turn it off, whether the kitchen was running behind, because I'd noticed the ticket times looked long from where I was sitting. That's all it was. A question. The kind of question a customer asks. Derek laughed. Not a big laugh. A short, ugly little laugh. The kind designed to be heard by everyone at the table, but explained away as nothing if anyone objected. And then he said it. Don't worry about her. She doesn't tip. She's cheap. He said her. Not Robert. Her. Like I wasn't even sitting there. Like I was a rumor about myself. The waiter didn't know what to do with that. He gave a polite half-smile, the kind you learn fast in this job, the kind that says I did not consent to being part of this, and please don't make me part of this at the same time, and he excused himself to check on desserts. Claire went red. Not embarrassed red. Angry red. She started to say his name in that warning tone wives develop, Derek, but I held up a hand. Not yet, I thought. Not here. Not in front of Maddie's cake. I didn't say anything. I finished my water. I watched my granddaughter blow out 10 candles, and I clapped along with everyone else. And inside, something that had been quiet for 9 years finally, calmly, decided it was done being quiet. Because here's what Derek didn't know. Sitting there so pleased with his own joke that he actually reached for a second piece of cake afterward like he'd earned it. That restaurant carries my name on a deed he's never seen. That waiter he'd just thrown under the bus to save face over a completely reasonable question. That waiter works for me. Not technically through some old paperwork nobody remembers. For me, every schedule, every wage increase, every bad Yelp review that gets a personal response, those cross a desk with my name on it 3 times a week because retirement, for men like me, is a suggestion more than a fact. I want you to sit with that for a second, because this is the part of the story that separates the ones who get away with it from the ones who don't. Derek made his joke to a room he thought he understood. A cheap old man, a nervous young waiter, an audience of family who'd laugh along or stay quiet either way. He had no idea the room actually belonged to me. I let the night end normally. I hugged Maddie. I told Claire I loved her. I shook Derek's hand at the door, and if my grip lasted half a second longer than his, he was too busy checking his phone to notice. Then I went home, and I did something Derek would have known better than to let happen if he'd ever bothered to ask a single real question about my life in 9 years. I called my floor manager, the man who's run that location for me for 6 years, a man named Tom who I trust with the actual keys to the place, and I asked him to pull the ticket from that table. Not to check on the food, to check on something else entirely. Here's a detail Derek definitely didn't think through in the moment he made his little joke. That waiter, the one Derek humiliated in front of a paying table to protect his own ego over a question about kitchen timing. That waiter had, in fact, already earned a tip on our table. Because I'd pre-authorized one before the meal even started, the way I do at every location, every time quietly off to the side because a man who forgot what a hard shift feels like isn't a man I want running my restaurants, and he isn't a man I want to be either. Derek called me cheap in front of my family about a bill I'd already paid twice over before dessert arrived. Now, I could have let it go. I'd thought about letting it go plenty of times over 9 years. But there's a specific kind of arrogance that doesn't correct itself. It just waits for a bigger stage. And 2 weeks later, Derek gave me one, without meaning to. Claire and Derek hosted a small dinner at their house. Nothing formal, just family, getting the families together kind of night, Derek's parents included, since his father had just retired from 30 years at an insurance firm and Derek wanted, in his words, everyone to celebrate the family success together. Derek loves that phrase, the family success, as if success is a weather pattern that happens to a family rather than something any one person actually built. Somewhere around the second bottle of wine, Derek's father asked me, politely, what I used to do for work. Just making conversation. And before I could answer, Derek jumped in, pleasant on the surface, but I'd had 9 years to learn the difference between Derek being pleasant and Derek performing, and said, Robert used to run a little diner chain. Small stuff. Local. Not really success, but hey, everybody's got their thing. Little. Local. Not really success. Claire's jaw actually dropped. She started to correct him. She knows the real numbers. She's seen the paperwork. She helped me move boxes out of the old office when I finally retired. But I put my hand on her arm this time too, and I smiled. And I said something that I'd been sitting on for 2 weeks ever since that birthday dinner. I said, Derek, since we're on the topic, did you enjoy Maddie's birthday dinner at the restaurant? He said, sure, great place, good chicken, the usual. And I said, I'm glad you liked it. I own 40% of it, along with the 2 locations on Grant Street and the one out by the mall you took your parents to last Easter. The table went quiet in that specific way. A table goes quiet when a fact lands that changes what every previous sentence in the conversation actually meant. Derek laughed first, that same short, ugly laugh, and said something like, wait, seriously. Since when? Since I built them, I said. 31 years. I sold most of my stake when I retired, kept some for myself, quietly because I like keeping an eye on things I built with my own hands. The waiter you told not to worry about me 2 weeks ago. He works for me. Directly. I sign off on his raises. I want to be clear that I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. Derek's face did all the work for me. I watched a man's entire understanding of his own social standing collapse in real time. The way a building doesn't fall so much as it just stops holding itself up. His father, to his credit, looked at Derek like he was seeing him for the first time too. You didn't know that, he asked his own son, and there was something almost sad in his voice, like a father watching his kid get caught in a lie he didn't even realize he'd been telling. Derek tried to recover. Of course he did. Men like Derek always try to recover, because admitting the ground actually moved under them is worse, to them, than anything else that could happen at that table. He said something about how small stuff can add up. That's actually impressive. Family businesses are great. Backpedaling so fast the words barely held together. But here's the thing about a reveal like that. It doesn't actually end when the truth comes out. That's just where the real story starts, because now everyone at that table had to go back and rewatch every single thing Derek had ever said about me, about success, about who was allowed to sit comfortably at the head of conversation, and none of it held up anymore. Claire didn't say much that night, but she called me the next morning, and she was quiet on the phone in a way she almost never is. She asked me why I never told Derek. I told her the truth, that I didn't tell Derek anything in 9 years because Derek never once asked me a real question about my life that wasn't really a question about himself. Every conversation we'd had was Derek performing success at me, never Derek curious about me. And you can't correct a man's assumptions about you if he's never interested enough to test them. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something I think about a lot. She said, "I think I married someone who needed you to be small so he could feel big." I didn't argue with her. I didn't need to. She'd already said the whole story in one sentence. But Claire is a better person than either me or Derek gave her credit for in that moment, because she didn't stop at feeling embarrassed for herself. A few days later, she told me something that stuck with me more than anything that happened at either dinner. She said she'd gone back, in her head, through years of small moments she'd brushed off as nothing. Derek correcting her in front of his co-workers about a detail that didn't matter, Derek taking credit at a dinner party for an idea that had actually been hers, Derek's habit of quietly positioning himself as the smart one in every room by making someone else look small first. None of it had ever been about me specifically, not really. I'd just been the easiest, safest target, because a quiet older man who doesn't fight back in public is exactly the kind of person a man like Derek looks for. That's the part of this story I didn't expect going in, and it's the part one think matters most. This was never really about a restaurant, or 40% of anything, or even about me. It was about a pattern Derek had built his whole personality around, one dinner table at a time, and it took one loud, careless comment about a waiter's tip for that pattern to finally have a witness with enough standing to call out plainly, in a way nobody at that table could laugh off. The weeks after that dinner were interesting to watch, in the way you watch weather change from a safe distance. Derek stopped making little jokes at family dinners. Derek started asking me actual questions, real ones about the business, about how I built it, questions with genuine curiosity behind them instead of performance. I don't think that came from respect exactly. I think it came from fear, the specific fear of a man who suddenly realizes he doesn't know how much room he's actually been given, or how easily it could be taken back. And here's the part one didn't expect, the part that actually mattered more than watching Derek squirm. That young waiter, the one Derek humiliated over a completely reasonable question about kitchen timing. I had Tom, my floor manager, follow up with him personally. Turns out he was putting himself through his second year of community college, working 40 hours a week on top of a full course load, and he'd been too proud to mention any of it to a table full of people laughing at his expense. I didn't do it as a grand gesture. I did it quietly, the way I've tried to do most things in this business. I made sure the scholarship fund we run at that location, the one Derek's never even noticed exists on our community board by the door, covered his next semester in full. Derek found out about that, eventually through Claire. He didn't say anything about it to me directly. But the next time we were all together, I noticed he was polite to our server all night. Overly polite. Actually, the kind of polite that comes from a man newly, uncomfortably aware that he doesn't know who's listening or who owns the room he's standing in. People ask me sometimes if I regret staying quiet for 9 years, letting a man like Derek talk down to me at family dinners without correcting him. I don't. Not because I enjoyed it. I didn't, not really, not even the reveal if I'm honest. I got less satisfaction out of watching his face fall than I expected to. What I got instead was something quieter and more useful. Proof, laid out plainly for my daughter to see with her own eyes, of exactly what kind of man she'd married. Not a villain, just a man who needed other people smaller than him to feel like he was standing on solid ground. I built a business by being careful with every dollar because I understood from the ground up what those dollars actually cost people to earn. Derek called that cheap, in front of a room, to save face over nothing at all. What he never understood, what people like Derek rarely understand until it's sitting right in front of them, is that the quietest person at the table is very often the one holding it up. He doesn't make jokes about me anymore. He doesn't need a lecture or a lawsuit or a scene. He just needed the truth, once spoken plainly, at a moment he couldn't laugh his way out of. A few months later, at a family barbecue, I watched him do something I never once saw him do in the 9 years before that dinner. A different waiter, at a different place entirely, mixed up an order for one of the kids. Small mistake, the kind that happens 50 times a night in any kitchen. The old Derek would have made a moment, A raised eyebrow, a comment to the table, something to remind everyone he'd noticed a flaw and they hadn't. This Derek just said it was no problem, thanked her, and moved on. Claire caught my eye across the table. Neither of us said anything about it. We didn't have to. I'm not telling you this because I think Derek turned into a different man overnight, or because I need you to believe there was some clean, tidy redemption at the end of it. People don't usually change that fast, and I'm not sure Derek fully has, even now. What I do know is that a man who once needed a nervous 22-year-old waiter to feel bigger than him now thinks twice before he does it again. That's not everything. But after 9 years of biting my tongue at family dinners, it was more than enough. And every time he sits down at one of my restaurants now, he tips well. Every single time. Even noticed. I always notice. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who mistook your patience for weakness, tell me about it below. I read every one of them. And if this one hit home for you, you know what to do before the next story starts.